A handful of square meters of land when taken individually are truly of very little practical use. They're certainly not enough to produce a sufficient amount of food for anyone. They won't be enough to protect a vital green space from urban sprawl or from complete neglect. They're insufficient for fostering new connections or rebuilding a true sense of community. They simply aren't effective if they're considered individually. But what if instead we were to try and bring them all together? Many people consider urban gardens without truly knowing them, seeing them as spaces where individuals, especially those of a certain age, enjoy cultivating a small patch of land. Nothing could be further from what they truly are and what I'll try to tell you about in this video. I am Pierpaolo, and I welcome you back or welcome you to my channel. I spent a week following Andrea Messori, president of the Replay Network Association. Later on, we'll get to know his work much better. For now, it will be enough for you to know that together with a group of Colombian, Austrian, and Spanish citizens, we encountered gardens, gardeners, and various levels of institutions to uncover the true meaning of three key phrases from this journey, namely community urban gardens, and how agriculture can be not just an end in itself, but a powerful means to reshape society.
Well, in these three words together, you'll discover the very essence of what we're currently working on, but there's also the complete history of what we've been doing for so many years. We need to know that in Rome there's a very long history of urban gardens, but they were essentially war gardens. They were spaces the citizens had reclaimed right after the war, and they started cultivating what were called war gardens or survival gardens, and that's why they did it.
Snapshots from Rome's wartime gardens, where office workers and laborers transform into cultivators. Near the baths of Caracalla, a group of employees joyfully dedicates themselves to this healthy activity. Government workers dedicate their free hours to the gardens on Via dell'Impero, flourishing fields of lettuce, potatoes, and peas at Villa Umberto. Who would recognize secretaries, typists, and department heads from the ministry and these expert gardeners?
But gardens had been established to address the severe food scarcity in urban areas. Their sole purpose was ensuring survival. Once the emergency concluded, naturally, the pressing need to cultivate them would have ended. But we are only at the very beginning of this story, because from food, we transition to another crucial necessity: space.
Since Rome is the greenest municipality in Europe, there were so many spaces that the city obviously couldn't reach in terms of institutions. Not everything could be recovered. Everything followed in the proper manner. So there were many gray areas within all this green, let's say. And here two strands emerged. The first, that of gardens, individual gardens, illegal gardens, spontaneous gardens of single people who simply had spaces near their homes that weren't being used. They were just left to themselves, and so they started taking care of them, cultivating them. And that's one type of story. Following that, however, there is another kind of story which begins a little later after the 1970s, and instead a series of civic uprisings start to emerge. That is, citizens who discover that as the city kept expanding, as it continued to build up more and more and therefore began to occupy all available spaces, it became clear that those areas which should have been green spaces but were actually occupied. What exactly were they occupied with? Garbage, waste disposal, all these things that in actual fact had absolutely nothing to do with anything green. In that instance, it was the community that sprang into action, taking to the streets, particularly in their immediate neighborhoods, and successfully reclaiming these areas.
However, there was a significant issue. Simply cleaning these spaces and then making them available for use once more proved to be insufficient, because you would merely remove something, and that very thing you had taken away would inevitably reappear again shortly thereafter.
have found.
This park was an area that was actively reclaimed by the local citizens. As you can clearly observe all around us, there is extensive concrete development. This, therefore, is a truly essential green lung for an entire neighbourhood.
You are in an area where the Lazio region was built there, so the headquarters of the region, the region of Rome, was the perfect space in a neighborhood like this to construct a beautiful giant supermarket.
We have cleaned up this area, which was in so-so. Anyone who lives here knows it very well. It took us an entire day just to open the gate. It was completely overgrown with brambles and trash. You only see certain parts cultivated because those are the areas where we were able to change the soil, because over there there's cement, and down here there's also cement.
This area, unfortunately, was very degraded because all the builders were using it to dump tiles and other debris, waste materials from their construction activities, and practically we had to spend a significant amount of time trying to reclaim it. The reclamation process was the very first step, and it proved to be extremely difficult and very lengthy.
When we arrived here, it was quite naturally a complete dump. I can't even tell you how many trucks at our own expense and with our own hard work hauled away all sorts of waste.
So from this, the idea of urban gardens then emerged, which means starting to cultivate those areas, thereby keeping them green in effect, but ensuring there's a constant activity taking place on them, and also providing a consistent reason for citizens to engage with them regularly, not just as a one-off event, but to do it constantly, every day for a period of time, ensures a message is automatically conveyed. This is a space where something is present. It's not an empty void that anyone can just use for anything they wish. It is a green space. Those who originally created these spaces intended for them to remain open and not become closed-off areas. From this, we then arrive at the word community, which subsequently opens up another word, which opens up another story.
And so begins another story, the one that's most imminent.
Saving the space the city constantly tries to devour creates another need, one that fills that space with people and content, community. But community must be built around a mission. It needs to engage with similar experiences, to network, and it needs to be recognized not only by the surrounding area, but by the city itself.
In the early 2000s, a discussion began among various entities that had undertaken this path, that of becoming community urban gardens, because there was a problem, namely that these actions were in fact actions that had been done without a permit. So they were effectively illegal. It was a different kind of occupation, though. It was an occupation that served to give back to society, not to take from it. It was exactly the opposite. But at that time, they weren't very accepting. The word network was an incredibly offensive term. You couldn't even utter the word network. Why? Because an urban garden is in its neighborhood, lives in its neighborhood, was born there, and the only thing it has to do is interact with its neighborhood. In reality, that's not true, because then studying them, to be able to do a community project, we had to study them, we had to see, we had to talk to people. And the more I studied them, the more I saw that in reality they had a lot of things in common, that in reality they had a series of things that was incredibly broad. We did the first project where we simply took them around to get to know other gardens. We brought other gardens to Rome. So to be able to diversify the message we were sending to institutions, it was necessary to embark on a specific journey. This journey, in fact, began with a process of self-regulation. There was no law. The community urban garden didn't exist as a clearly defined entity, and so citizens began to work on the terminology, using community urban garden, giving themselves the right words to define their activities, and they also started to establish some guidelines for themselves. Interesting guidelines, because they began to be what would later become the embryo of the first resolution that was in Rome, Resolution 38 of 2015, which the Capitoline Assembly then adopted, and which effectively gives official recognition to the community urban garden as an existing entity.
But Rome is considered the largest farming municipality in Europe. Beyond the agricultural areas that are primarily for production, there is also the parallel and widespread reality of spontaneous urban gardens, which have developed in a rather disorderly fashion within the city, which ensure both the public purpose of maintenance and enhancement and an indirect benefit for the entire community, fulfilling an ecological social function, improving urban quality and public health. The Capitoline administration acknowledges its importance and aims to regulate the principles and criteria for the establishment, operation and management of green areas owned by Rome Capital. This resolution therefore acknowledges urban gardens, but it does not yet go so far as to support their development. It regulates what exists, but does not make institutions subsidiary to their continuity and constant evolution. Hence the need for a new regulation with a community outlook, whose proposal focuses precisely on this point. Resolution 38 of 2015 from the very beginning represented a significant step, but it was limited to the mere regulation of the phenomenon, without ever reaching the point of promoting its full development as a clear political choice made by the city. There is a clear need for new regulations concerning community urban gardens, which beyond their recognition also foster their development as hubs for participation, active citizenship and education on sustainability. Active members of community urban gardens are not merely implementers of agroecological practices, but genuine disseminators of environmental education and multipliers of actions connected to sustainability through a community-based project.
When we had to discuss with institutions, for example, what a community urban garden could be to convey a message, we used an image. An urban garden, or that single square meter of soil that makes up an urban garden, is like a small 1 square meter table where 4 people are seated. And if we all know, and indeed we all tell ourselves that what can be harvested or extracted from a single square meter of land is simply not enough to sustain 4 people, allowing them to eat, then the crucial question arises. If one of those 4 individuals is eating, what exactly are the other 3 doing in the meantime? The other 3 are focusing on different aspects, on other products that come from the community urban garden. Because while one person might cultivate just a single square meter of land, there's actually the potential to work and to leverage that effort to develop educational policies, to develop environmental policies, to develop social policies for integration and for inclusion. All these things are vegetables from the garden. At that point, you understand why if I put a kilo of tomatoes on one side of the scale, and on the other side I put a kilo of tomatoes grown in a community urban garden, the scale starts to tip and fall towards the side of the kilo of tomatoes produced in the community urban garden. Because the social density of that kilo of tomatoes expresses a whole series of other products that have nothing to do with the tomato itself. At that point, what does the institution then start to feel the necessity of doing? What actually occurred was to become involved in the process of establishing the new regulations for urban gardens. That's why the regulations for urban gardens were written entirely from community urban gardens. But a very extensive process was carried out in all 15 municipalities, in all environmental commissions, before going to the Capitoline Assembly, so that this wouldn't be something coming from just one side, but truly from all sides, because the community urban garden is at this point a policy instrument, a public policy instrument, that is situated in an area in the vicinity of a town hall.
It must be a grassroots movement that starts from the land and influences policies made from above. Food policies and working on urban gardens, as well as on social agriculture within large metropolitan areas, or more generally, within urban centers. Well, it means to actively tackle the complex issue of policies designed to combat economic, social, environmental, and cultural inequalities, doing so in a truly innovative and forward-thinking manner. And the fact that cities are really starting to network and collaborate on this particular aspect, the development and maintenance of urban gardens name, it is fundamental precisely to build, and I say this without any rhetoric, truly communities of peace. That is where everyone can have access to food, but above all, everyone can enter into a social and not merely individual relationship that transforms our cities.
From the perspective of the underlying cultural philosophy, it's part of a new relationship that the city of Rome wanted to build with common goods. This means the administration is no longer solely responsible for managing common goods and making them available to citizens, nor it's the administration that by itself, when it decides to entrust citizens with or to collaborate with citizens for the management of common assets, still imposes a decision from above. We could have simply closed ourselves in a room, brought in 2 experts, the office staff, and the political representatives, and then just written a regulation. Instead, a much more arduous and challenging path was chosen, which ultimately led us to a comprehensive text that we first informally and then formally discussed and reviewed with all the environmental commissions from Rome's 15 municipalities.
Today, Friday, October 25th, we are here at the Campidoglio. The community of Rome's urban gardens has come to witness the discussion of our elected representatives in the Capitoline Assembly because the regulation concerning communal urban gardens is being debated. There have been so many contributions after the 800 hours of work by the urban gardeners, after 2 years of a participatory process, after having gone through all of Rome's municipalities, the environment committees, the Capitoline Environment Committee. Here we are. The text has been changed, and it will probably change even during the assembly session, but what we can say is that it has been improved. So the project that everyone worked on to the best of their abilities was improved through an institutional process. This is truly a collective journey, a path for everyone, because it has passed through all levels of review. It's good to see that institutional dialogue isn't something that just goes over people's heads, but citizens take action and their elected officials embrace it, improving it whenever possible, as was done this time.
The Capitoline Assembly has just unanimously approved the regulations for Rome's community urban gardens, a truly significant team effort that arises from the proactive involvement of the gardens themselves, which have diligently worked over these past years to present to the administration, a document that followed the directives and the guidelines that the administration itself had established for itself, and which today was brought before the council after a very extensive period of consultation with the territories, with the local municipalities. But we have incorporated many of the observations that came from the municipalities, and so I believe we've made the regulation even stronger and more participatory. Community gardens truly become a fundamental part of the very construction of our local communities. They become a place where we don't simply cultivate just the vegetables, but where we cultivate community, we cultivate relationships, and we cultivate people.
What exactly changes from today with the introduction of this new regulation? What changes is that the citizen who has consistently taken a proactive stance has spontaneously established urban gardens, very often accomplishing this entirely by themselves, having to depend solely on their own capabilities and facing every single limitation that this entailed. From today, yes, he is able to do so knowing that he has the full backing of the administration. The administration, quite clearly after today's events, also has political support on its side and naturally possesses the opportunity to collaborate with what is arguably the most crucial expression of the institutional operational framework, the municipality. The municipality will finally have a single regulation in its territory with which it can address the allotments on public land of the municipality of Rome, the allotments that are on land designated for the municipalities or on lands that may belong to Roma Natura, a park, a foundation, or even the Catholic Church. In Rome, there are so many different actors and entities who, from a ground-level perspective, come together to interact. However, one single will, the desire to give space and a leading role to the community, is what has truly guided all of this. We began with a small plot of land cultivated purely for enjoyment, from a place rescued from its former state of degradation, and we have now reached the point of discussing social organization, shared common goods, the vital dialogue between citizens and their institutions, and the concept of solidarity. And most importantly, we have observed how in the grand scheme of things, the simple act of cultivation often takes a secondary role. It's easy to understand now how the experience of community urban gardens has a much broader scope than what you might infer by simply looking at those few square meters of land.
This experience expresses a model, and this model can reach any place. It can be transformed through the work of different communities. However, we still lack one more step to truly understand the whole story in depth.
Allotment gardens, in fact, don't simply yield food, but cultivate vital relationships and synergies in those very spaces where society has become so estranged from its own people.
Obviously, when it comes to communicating, when it comes to bringing together different people with diverse experiences within a community urban garden, there is always someone needed to smooth out the rough edges, to take care of the communication,
and who in fact looks after the people. When we first started to exchange people and gardeners between the community gardens at a European level, but also when we began to talk more among the different gardens in the various districts of Rome, what emerged was that there were people who were in fact 100% involved in the garden. From morning till evening, they would do nothing but work in the community urban garden. But when you go and ask them, could you show me which one is your plot? They would tell you, oh, I don't have one. I had to give it to someone else because I simply don't have the time. Where did all this time go? What was it invested in? Well, these people actually cultivate people, meaning they dedicate all their time to helping others, to communicating, to building ideas, putting them together and seeking to answer the daily questions that arise in an urban garden. It's truly a common figure, a function we found in Spain, Greece, and England. Not everyone called it the same way, or rather they didn't name it. It existed, but this function wasn't clear. Sometimes it was one person, sometimes it was two, sometimes it was a group, but there was always someone who was in fact responsible for accompanying people. So, and we ultimately chose something that wasn't English because gardenizer is a word that's mixed from the English garden organizer, but then it didn't really mean anything in German, nor in French, nor in Italian, nor even in Spanish. And this, you see, was the crucial turning point for us. And it meant nothing to anyone, so everyone could say what it meant to them. From this, the gardenizer became a key reference point that we all discussed, that if it exists, it means the urban garden is communal. If it exists, it means we understand we're not just growing zucchini and tomatoes. If there is one, it means there's someone who also manages the external contacts, who is responsible for the community. And when they speak of community, they are not speaking of the community within the garden plot. They are speaking of the broader community in which the garden is situated, the local territory, the municipality, the city, the state, and Europe.
The rest of the world.
The creation of this figure, along with the whole development of community urban gardens in Rome, has raised the interest of the Colombian institutions of Barranquilla.
The country's fourth largest city, which is very developed from a commercial point of view, but which simultaneously encounters considerable difficulties, particularly within its outlying peripheral areas and through its urban gardens.
It is actively working to reconstruct the community, starting right from the most challenging places. The experience we had in Colombia was an experience where the Colombian city of Barranquilla asked Rome, how did you manage that? And we replied, well, yeah, we honestly don't know. We can tell you what we are doing. And so, in fact, the experience with Colombia was a transfer of the knowledge we possessed so that they would have the opportunity to conceive a local model. There were fundamental differences when we first went there, which we discussed with the Colombian authorities. One, public squares do not exist. Why don't public squares exist? Because gathering places are essentially points of risk. Therefore, urban planning policy has avoided having public squares. Nowadays, however, Colombian policy has considered building, but it cannot build public squares. So what does it do? She went back to the original concept of a park.
In Colombia, the parks are the town squares. However, within the park, there is a problem. When you create a park, you are creating a public good. But if you haven't educated the citizens to have a sense of civility and social cohesion, then what is good for everyone becomes good for no one.
Not for all, and consequently they were confronted with the problems of park destruction, of enormous economic investments that had been made in green areas only to find that the green space was being completely disintegrated in a very short period of time.
And so, when they saw the experience of community urban gardens, they thought of how it started in Rome. That is, going, cleaning, tidying up a space, cultivating it to ensure it remains green and available to everyone. However, when we arrived at the community urban gardens, there was a peculiarity, another essential element. Well, only 4% of the population had agroecological knowledge. Because actually, even if we were intervening in the city's poorest outskirts, where there was 98% migration, it was a return migration, Venezuelans and others, but it was all metropolitan migration. People who lived in large cities and then moved to another big city, they knew absolutely nothing about the land, about cultivation. They didn't even know where to begin. So we started, and the training program became one of the most significant, one of the most crucial pillars of our work. Through these trainings, we then observed those individuals who had the desire or even had recognition within the territory and communities and were followed by others. That is essentially the basic prototype of what constituted the necessary characteristics to be a good gardenizer.
This is where the experience I was able to follow this week originated, uniting two different projects, one at a European level and the other specifically with Colombia.
It was structured according to some very interesting principles, especially if we consider where it all began, from a small piece of land cultivated in free time. This year, we aim to combine two distinct programs, one dedicated to European gardeners continuing our exchange activities. The other involved Colombians from the second Gardenizer Pro course, who are here to complete their internship. We gave these individuals 2 weeks, and then the first week was dedicated to visits. The visits, however, do have a specific theme. What is the nature of the relationship and the level of collaboration between civil society, community, urban gardens, and institutions? Every time they saw, they consistently moved from visiting 1 or 2 urban gardens to a meeting with Sabrina Alfonsi, who is the Counselor for Environmental Policies for the Municipality of Rome. Then 2 more gardens, and we went to meet Gianmarco Palmieri, the President of the Environment Commission. After that, 2 more gardens, and we went to the FAO. 2 more urban gardens, and we went to meet with the Urban Gardens Office of the City of Rome. They really needed to understand that these 2 things must go together. This is what community is all about. But here in Rome, it took us 80 long years. They have this particular mission, and it's set to be completed within a 3-year time frame. Therefore, it became absolutely necessary to make available these various facets of the very same medal so that they could effectively alternate their roles. When we subsequently selected the urban gardens, we specifically chose those that could prove most beneficial to the developing communities in Barranquilla, Colombia. In reality, these gardens all share the very same design. That's precisely what they refer to it as, isn't it? And more or less, there are the same narrow streets, the same things surrounding them, the same tanks for water recovery,
the communal kitchen in all of them, and a roof on every single one. So if someone says on paper they're all the same, that's not possible because they're in a different territory and a different community.
So the moment the community truly steps in, everything will change. There's one in Barranquilla that's practically located inside an urban park. And what did we do? Well, let's take them to the Tor Carbone Urban Gardens. Where exactly is that located? In Tor Marantia, one of the areas where the municipality of Rome is environmentally dedicating significant time and effort because it's a place that remained closed for a very long time.
It's now reopening. It has AFAs, which are entry points for citizens, but it must also preserve the Roman countryside as it has always been, and it's planning to restore the old farmhouses. Well, inside this thing, there's an urban garden, a community urban garden. But just think, that area is only just opening up now. The community urban garden is already approaching 10 years old, so that means the garden was established even earlier.
When we go to Las Gardenias. Las Gardenias is an area completely surrounded by houses. What's closer than the Garbatella Urban Gardens, where residents of public housing came down to the streets to protect the only plot that hadn't been developed, which was in fact where all the debris and waste from the Lazio region's construction had been dumped. These are some of the decisions we've taken, but we also visited very small, even tiny gardens. We traveled throughout all of Rome, aiming to cover every single area, observing all different types of sizes, and also exploring the various spaces, such as, for instance, the beautiful valley of the Agnène, which is a protected valley that has an association with a 40-year history of environmental activism and creates community gardens as one of its main activities. But it's constructing it within the river's natural channel, fully aware that should the river need to reclaim its designated area, that space exists, and it's a fact known to all.
However, what then transpires? As time continues to pass in these years where the river isn't taking it back for itself and the river doesn't even need it, why can't we organize ourselves in a natural way, in a manner intrinsically linked to that river's channel, to utilize it for creating community urban gardens? This means questioning how things operate. It means challenging a way of seeing the city as closed off, as complete, as unchangeable.
We're talking about the capital of Italy. We're talking about a metropolitan area. We're talking about cities that, on paper, are beautiful, finished cities where nothing more can be done, nothing more can be changed. We're demonstrating that it's not the case. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it gave you some food for thought. As always, to support my work, it's very important to subscribe, like, comment, and especially share every video on your social media channels.
For me, this is fundamental, but for you it's immediate and very simple. For more direct support, you can use the thanks button located right below the video, or you could consider subscribing on Patreon for just a little more than the cost of a coffee each month. I'll leave the link for you in the description below. I truly appreciate you spending your time here on my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!